Welcome to the Solid Verbal. And now, Dan and Ty.
Dan Rubenstein, a week from today, you and I are going to start recording our previews.
Oh, yeah, buddy.
For the 2025 season. It's going to start to get real here. On the Solid Verbal. You won't start hearing those promos. You won't start hearing those previews until, I guess, July 1st when we're going to start rolling them out. But we thought before we got to that point, we can't, honestly, in good faith, move ahead with our lives.
I agree.
Without first confronting the trauma from 2024, right?
Totally agree. There is not a team in America, there is not a fan base in America free from the experience of being traumatized by this perfect, great, imperfect, horrible sport that is college football. And I think the healthiest thing that we could all do as a college football universe is acknowledge things that traumatized us from 2024, accept that they hurt us, and try to dig deep and figure out why it's okay to move forward in love and peace. Yes?
I think that computes. Look, we did an episode like this a year ago. It was a big hit. We decided to bring it back now about a year later. We put a post out on our Patreon at verballers.com.
Once again, verballers.com. Support the show. Continue.
Exactly. This was one of those free posts where as long as you're a free member, you can read it. You can post your thoughts on it. We didn't really want to limit this to just people that pay via the Patreon because we care about the entirety of the Verballerhood. Dan.
Speak for yourself. No, of course.
We want everybody to get their heads right in preparation for this college football season. So all we did was put a post out there, said we are recording our fan therapy episode. We're looking for your submissions. We want to know about the college football moments that hurt you the most last season. And Dan, let me tell you,
we
were inundated with pain.
Yes.
A very visceral feel to this post. Reading through them all, we have organized them all. We're going to try to get through as many of them as we can. Thankfully, we had a bunch that I think revolved around similar themes and game situations. So that makes it a little bit easier to go through all of this trauma. I should also add, neither Dan nor I are actual medical professionals.
What?
So if you are having any kind of real mental turmoil over any of these situations, we would encourage you to see a real doctor.
Be proactive.
Not take our advice at face value. We don't know what the hell we're talking about. We did workshop, though, that I am the psychiatrist and you are the psychodanalyst.
Of course. Works really
in this here episode.
I thought psychiatrist was better than psychologist for this specific. We're not prescribing active medication, though. You do have recommendations, do you not, at the ready?
I mean, I can Google it. Yeah, I'll see what I can find that might help with some of these very acute college football circumstances that we're going to go through over the next 45 minutes.
Provasic.
Or an hour. Or I do have that.
Provasic.
I don't know if that will help. I don't know if that will help with any of your mental trauma after watching your team last season. But if it does, we do have that sound at the ready. You have some sounds at the ready as well. Hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes. As I said, we're going to start ramping up the previews here as we turn the page into the month of July. So recording next week, going to save that one in the queue, start publishing those all throughout the month of July and most of August, Dan. That's what it looks like here at Solid Verbal HQ.
Yeah, and this is just a fair warning to all those listening, maybe affected by the traumas laid out by our listeners, that this is going to be an exercise in exposure therapy. We are not going to back away from the naked, raw truth of what is still very clearly causing people pain. So, as always, we're going to take our cues from the legendary Maury Povich, who seems to be a proponent of exposure therapy.
Bring out the olive.
Classic Maury. Woman claims she's deathly afraid of olives because it reminds her, what was it, Ty, of the eyes of dead people?
The eyes of her dead grandfather.
The eyes of her dead grandfather are brought back to life by the sight of green olives, I suppose with pimentos.
Yes.
That would probably make the most sense. And so the lower Chiron is Sally is scared of spiders, lizards, ... ellipses. That's an ellipses, right? The ...
The 3 dots, yeah.
And olives.
Bring out the olive.
It's so ridiculous. So we do have clips. We do have clips from some of the traumas, and it's good to face them head on. And fair's fair, Ty. We've got Notre Dame here. We've got Penn State here. We have Oregon here. We are not shying away from our pain. And I'm ready to roll as the psychodanalyst. Hey, real quick, it'd be great if you could consider subscribing to the YouTube channel down below. It really helps us out.
Dude, we got dozens of teams here. We had so much response to this posting. As I said, you could feel it reading through this comment thread. As I said, I did group some together via team. Why don't we just get the most obvious one out of the way here first?
Yeah. Is this the clip of Pat McAfee whiffing against a softball pitcher so he can face his own traumas?
No. We can consult Andrew Marchand on that one.
By the way,
what kind of proof he has.
Sidebar: I would love the opportunity to face a superb, elite College World Series softball pitcher and absolutely wreck myself with embarrassment whiffing. I think it would be the coolest thing ever to be absolutely humbled. And I guess not everybody allegedly agrees. Continue.
Shane writes in, been a Notre Dame fan for as long as I can remember. No one else in my family ever was. No legacy, just me being weird and different growing up. I had never been to a game at Notre Dame Stadium, nor had I ever visited campus in my entire life until the week of my 37th birthday in 2024. My wife had a medical conference in Chicago. We took the opportunity to drive over for my first home game experience ever.
Roll the clip.
I'm sorry,
roll
Shane.
The clip.
Go ahead, roll the clip.
And that's blocked at the line of scrimmage. And the Huskies are celebrating the biggest upset in their school's history.
I'm laughing, but deep down I'm crying, Shane. I'm with you, brother. Yeah. Got to see the campus the Friday before and do all the touristy things, as you can imagine. It was amazing. We also took my then 2-year-old on this trip.
Oh, no.
I even met with someone I had been podcasting and blogging with for years for the first time in person at this game. It was all set up for an amazing experience. Yes, we went for the NIU game, the 16-14 inexplicable loss to the Huskies of NIU, Dan.
Can I ask you, I can't ask this listener, but if you're going to speak for the Notre Dame community, has the Notre Dame community collectively gotten over it, or is it still like a pain point despite the season going in an otherwise incredible direction?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Yes and yes, because winning all those playoff games, getting to the national championship definitely papers over some of those sins.
Right.
Okay. That definitely was a nice little palate cleanser, as was the way that Notre Dame went on to complete its season.
Sure.
Not even in the playoffs, but finished strong, definitely came together more as a team. It had a different feel after that NIU game.
Of course.
I think that goes without saying. But that being said, this wasn't their only loss over Marcus Freeman's tenure to a MAC team.
Right. Or to like a team of that size, right? Losing
a team
to
of that
Marshall.
Size, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, sure. So my only point is definitely like these G5 non-conference games still stick in the craw when you see them on the schedule. There's a little bit of trepidation when you see that one getting bigger in the window.
Well, not only that, it's going to sort of creep around a corner in an unexpected way. Not saying Marcus Freeman's going to lose this type of game ever again. There's no better wake-up call than this type of Saturday. But
sure,
this is definitely a listicle game, right? The 12 times Notre Dame out of nowhere, like the USF game, I remember, right? That every team has these crazy upsets. So now this is just a new chapter on the surprise listicle that somebody posts on Facebook or whatever.
I think that all computes. Yeah. So with all that being said, yes, I do look at Notre Dame's schedule this year and see they've got a game against Boise State. Boise State was a playoff team a year ago.
Yeah.
May not be a playoff team again, but that one does not quite bring with it the same level of fear that I think a team that I would consider a little bit lower on the totem pole, if that computes.
Right. I don't think there's an opponent on Notre Dame's schedule you're like, I could see them coming out flat against.
Right. Yeah.
Like they're not going to come out flat against Navy.
We got a bunch of other messages with respect to that NIU loss. Melty out on our Discord said, pooping your pants in public, no matter what else you do in life, it's all people remember about you.
And you know what? Here's a little disclaimer. Everybody kind of does it at some point. You know what?
I know, but when you see, listen, there was a guy on my baseball team who did it in
gamble
public,
and lose, okay?
and we still talk about it with
I'm
people
sure
that were there that day. Joe says it's not losing to NIU since it didn't affect the path, and Thomas Hammock is a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
It's not the national championship loss since it was technically 2025. It's probably every time Jason Garrett called a game because he struck the fear of God every time he looked straight into the camera. You are not wrong, Joe.
Yeah,
I do hear that. And then we got a different Joe R who says that he is an almost 40-year-old Notre Dame fan. He had zero energy for the national title game, the biggest game since he was 8, because he's also a diehard Detroit Lions fan, and he attended the playoff loss to the Commanders 48 hours prior.
So he was protecting himself.
We've got like a couple different kinds of trauma at play here.
Yeah.
The Notre Dame loss, that one happened in slow motion, but over the course of an afternoon. We also have instances of slow motion trauma unfolding as it did for Oklahoma State, as it did for Florida State over the course of a year.
Ooh,
where you just sort of wonder, like, where's the bottom? What is happening? There is this failure, I think, to comprehend what's happening in the moment. And then, of course, we have, and we're going to get to this, I'm sure, momentarily.
Yeah.
The plays.
Yes, of course.
The backbreaking call.
Specific
or no
moments.
Call, specific moments, things of that nature. So, yes, the Notre Dame thing, I think that goes without saying. Of course, we had to lead with that.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. That's a great one. Obviously, that fits the bill, especially because it seemed like Notre Dame would have a number of chances to rectify the first 3.5 quarters late and just didn't work out. Yeah, we've got, and the good thing about, I guess good thing, it's all relative, the Florida State and Oklahoma State situations, where Florida State coming off of a terrific season that ended in heartbreak in 2023 with Jordan Travis's injury, and Oklahoma State winning its way into the Big 12 championship game in the 2023 season. So the assumption would be like, yeah, we're still pretty good. And after 2 or 3 weeks, it was very easy to make peace with where those teams were. We're like, it might get a little bit better, but probably not in some sort of dramatic way. So you can exhale a little bit on a certain level. That said, Oklahoma State still... They were bad in 2024, but they weren't lose to Arkansas in double overtime. Bad. That was another item on our trauma list, was it not?
We got ones from both Zach and Michael who reference Arkansas's collapse against Oklahoma State.
Yes.
Zach says collapsing against Oklahoma State, then being completely offensively harmless and helpless against Texas and Texas A&M, being blown out by Ole Miss, losing to LSU big after keeping it close for a half, and the culmination of blowing the game against Mizzou. It's the circle of Arkansas, and it sucks. I want to get off the ride now. Thank you, Zach.
Right. The interesting thing about Arkansas that I think an Arkansas fan can use as fuel during this offseason, right? How do you make a delicious brisket, Ty? You got to keep feeding it a little bit of log, keep that fire, keep those embers going. That's what the offseason is for.
A slow burn.
The slow burn. You use the pain as inspiration, because Arkansas has the ability with, I don't know if you can bring up the schedule as I'm filibustering here.
I can.
Arkansas has the ability, I think it's week 4 against Notre Dame. They're hosting Notre Dame.
Yeah, week 5, September 27th, yes. That really big weekend with Alabama, Georgia, with Penn State, Oregon. Yeah.
Arkansas has the ability this year, given their schedule, with one, upside, Talon Green, one of the 4 or 5 most exciting returning quarterbacks in America. Just what his upside is as a dual threat, as a passer, whatever. With pairing Talon Green with the rest of this roster, which is a transfer from Southern Utah there, which is, he can do the funniest thing. Arkansas can do the funniest thing, and it can be Talon Green and the unknown Bad News Bears doing like a Diego Pavia and sticking it to a bunch of better put together or longer put together teams on this schedule.
Well,
And that's pretty great.
It is pretty great. And I think Michael kind of expands upon the whole Arkansas ride that Zach mentioned in his post by saying that generally Arkansas had an awful time with sacks and fumbles.
Mm-hmm.
It always seemed to happen as they get down into the red zone, leading to a long field goal attempt that would go awry. And he closes on a positive note by saying he hopes the talent on the line takes a step forward, that Talon Green is able to have a better internal clock
Totally.
in his second season now with Bobby Petrino. So, yeah, look, we like Talon Green.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're forever interested in the Arkansas story because we think there is a lot more meat on the bone there. But this is the second year in a row now we've heard frustration from Arkansas fans who, like to Zach's point, don't know where to put this trauma and need to try and rectify it in a hurry. They got a bunch of road games on this schedule. It's a classic SEC schedule where you've got your gauntlet starting in like the middle portion of October that runs through the rest of the year. So it's not going to be easy. It's never easy. There, of course, is that game against Notre Dame. They do host that one. I think that's an earlier game, if memory serves. So we'll see what they do against a top 10 team earlier in the season. But, yeah.
Here, by the way,
Arkansas comments
here are some of the schools that Arkansas is using. I'm going to incorrectly use the verb moneyball. They're going to try to moneyball their way to wins. They're going to try to find a bunch of Scott Hattebergs all over lower-level college football. Texas, Permian Basin, Kent State, Maine. What else do we have here? I see some North Texas. I see some Charlotte. I see some... I just see all these logos on the 247. Eastern Michigan here. There's a lot going into this year's Arkansas roster that, and I mentioned Southern Utah. Could be fun.
They need to find their Greek god of walks, is what you're saying.
The Euclid?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next.
Where do you want to go next? You've got the clips.
I do have the clips.
Which one should we go to next?
Let's stick with arguably the Venn diagram of exciting and ridiculous, because I think this is the rare instance that traumatized two teams.
Okay.
And that would be the 73 overtime Georgia Tech.
Fifth overtime, 2-point conversion attempt. Edge pressure, they pick it up, and they get the two-pointer with Dylan Bell.
So Georgia Tech fans obviously felt as if, and we have a note, I think, from, I think it was a Georgia Tech person, but it could have been a Georgia person, traumatized almost all the same. Georgia Tech people traumatized because the opportunities, plural, were there in all of those overtimes to take down a team who's won recent national championships.
In a rivalry,
in-state,
no less.
In a rivalry.
The rivalry is that missing ingredient that is not present in a bunch of the other games that people wrote in about. But when you've got a name brand game, clean, old-fashioned hate.
Mm-hmm. In Athens.
Yep. You're able to get, if you're a Georgia Tech fan, you're able to get that one to 8 overtimes. There are major implications on the line. Brandon wrote in about this. That's a tough one. That's a tough one to swallow.
Georgia Tech is in a good place, though. Like, they lose the Tooch, they lose their defensive coordinator, but their defense got noticeably so much better. On the verge of beating Georgia, absolutely beating Miami. Starting the season in Ireland with what we thought was a huge upset at the time and beating Florida State. Returning their backfield, Haynes King should have a healthy shoulder. Their defense has interesting pieces on all three levels. Blake Gideon, I think, is the new defensive coordinator coming in after coaching the secondary at Texas. There's just a lot to like. The schedule is pretty awesome. I think they traveled to Clemson early, but otherwise there's nothing. There's Syracuse there. We'll see what Syracuse looks like this year, but nothing obvious in terms of crazy danger outside of that Clemson game. It's pretty good right now to be a Georgia Tech fan, and so much better under Brent Key than it's been in a long, long time as a complete entertaining team.
Haynes King is back, right?
Yeah, and should be healthy. Like, he was dealing with the shoulder issues, and Haynes King, Jamal Haynes,
I mean, lose Eric Singleton, that hurts. He's going to Auburn, but to your point, the schedule, it's like at Colorado week 1. I don't know what we think of Colorado at this point. Colorado could be really good.
No,
could be really
they're
bad.
just not. They're an obvious mystery. They're not an obvious danger right now.
And I think that holds true for a vast majority of the teams on the schedule outside of, let's say, Clemson and Georgia, which will clearly be two tough matchups.
Yeah.
But the rest, it's just a hodgepodge of ACC teams that, frankly, could go either way on Virginia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
You can go either way on NC State, on Pitt, right? So it's there. It's there. They got to wrap Haynes King in bubble wrap, though. They got to figure out a way to not get him hurt.
Yeah.
He is the focal point of the offense, but provided they can keep doing what they're doing, I agree. Don't let that 8 overtime game get you down.
Yeah, I mean it's good times. It's high times to be a Georgia Tech fan. I think they're playing in Atlanta, but I think at Mercedes-Benz this year. So pseudo, but not really home game in clean old-fashioned hate. You mentioned Pitt, Ty.
Yeah,
and you mentioned that a lot of these were not rivalry traumatic experiences, but one of them was.
This one is.
Looking for somewhere. He fires downfield. Picked off by Kyle Lewis. And Pitt will win the Backyard Brawl.
Pitt, of
the
course.
Backyard Brawl. So we got a couple notes about this one on both sides of it.
Yes.
Bert wrote in. He was one of the first commenters when we put this out there. West Virginia fan here, blowing a 10-point lead to Pitt with under 5 minutes to go. Absolutely brutal. Possibly the maddest I've been during a West Virginia game since that one in 2007.
Yeah.
So, the whole rivalry component definitely rearing its ugly head here.
And feeling feelings for the first time in a long time as the rivalry was dormant for a good stretch of time.
That's the other element of this.
Yeah.
That's the other element of this.
You ready to love again?
So now, West Virginia, things took a turn for West Virginia. West Virginia's got a new coach, new old coach now moving forward. Don't know how Bert feels about that, but I think if I am trying to work through that trauma, I am hanging my hat on the start of a new era, a familiar face, somebody who did have a lot of success with the program over its semi-recent history, and somebody who actually had been coaching at a pretty high level before he came back to campus.
Agree.
Rich Rodriguez, right? Not exactly the same style of retread that we have seen in the past because Rich Rod was doing good things at a different school.
Correct.
So I think you hang your hat on that. The Pitt side of this, though, is interesting to me.
Okay.
We got a comment here from Daniel who talks about the highs and the lows of Pitt football. A 7-0 start.
But this would actually help West Virginia fans as well to hear this part of the equation.
This is why I'm grouping these together. Like,
thank you.
Yes, we all cheer for different teams. My hunch is that Bert is not rooting for Daniel. Daniel is not rooting for Bert. But there is a bit of a trauma bond here.
Uh-huh.
The highs and the lows of Pitt football. Daniel says 7-0 start, high-scoring offense.
Found a quarterback. Eli Holstein, sure.
Incredible comebacks against Cincinnati. He does mention West Virginia.
Yep.
The Thursday night massacre of Kyle McCord to get to 7-0.
Was that 5 picks?
He says it was near orgasmic as a fan.
That's exactly right.
I don't know if I can say that here.
You can. Explain to people what that means.
And then the obliteration at the hands of SMU, the 5th down against Virginia, the fight against Clemson only to let Klubnik ice it, the Louisville blowout, a BC loss on the road, and then a baffling game against Toledo. Just disgusting.
Well, speaking of losing to a MAC team, yeah.
Disgusting. I want to get hyped for this season. I just can't get over it. You're going to have to, Daniel. I would hang my hat on Eli Holstein. I would hang my hat.
Starting point.
Right. He was hurt. He was dinged up. That definitely was a fly in the ointment down the stretch. But I think having him back, that in and of itself is a reason to feel more optimistic about what is ahead this year.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It was 6 straight losses. And those were all, not all, but Louisville was pretty good. SMU was obviously good. Toledo is a world beater. They lost that game 48-46, by the way, in their bowl game around Christmas, I believe. I don't know, man. There's still the Syracuse thing, the Backyard Brawl thing. Pitt's just one of those teams where you really have I have no handle on where they're going to be strong or not year to year. As soon as you think, like, defense is going to be pretty good, they're getting 50 dropped on them by Toledo. And so I felt like there was enough. What was it, Des Reed last year? There was firepower on that offense when Eli Holstein was healthy. And look, they shouldn't have to come back. It doesn't look great against last year's version of West Virginia, last year's version of Cincinnati. As those teams did have up moments. That doesn't look great, but they're winning those games. And so you can say, okay, last year was our walk before we can crawl, or walk before we can run. And there was a sprained ankle after that walking halfway through the season. But I don't know. I think there's correctable elements. Like, they can beat Virginia. They lost to Virginia last year. They can beat Boston College. Although Boston College was pretty feisty last year. That there's stuff on there that's correctable, and I feel good about it as a Pitt observer. But that's what you can feel good about as a West Virginia fan. Sure, yes, we lost this game in catastrophic fashion, up 10 with, 4 or 5 minutes left.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
But, it's sort of like the enemy of my enemy. And so, like, you can be friends with the back half of Pitt's schedule. That, like, at least as a consolation, it's not winning, but as a consolation, you can have the Schadenfreude cocktail that was Pitt's November.
I want to talk about the Calgorithm, if I can.
Please do.
We got more Cal responses than I ever dreamed possible when I put this post together. But Cal was one of these stories from a year ago. It was both a heartwarming, a surprise story that we talked a lot about on the podcast, as well as one of, I guess, heartbreak here, which we're going to detail. For my money, that loss against Miami was one of the more traumatic things that I saw as a third-party observer of all of last season.
Yeah.
Because I remember it distinctly. You and I think, had either just gotten off of a stream or we were about to hop on one. Don't remember the exact chronology of things.
Right.
But I remember talking to you as this game was going on. And there was a very real feeling of Cal is about to let this slip away. You could see it happening in slow motion, and it hurt. So all of these messages that we got here, the one from Callie saying the 1 month span between mid-September and mid-October for Cal, but especially the Cal versus Miami game.
Yes.
The one where GameDay was in town, if you recall. The non-targeting call absolutely devastated me in a way that I still can't properly explain.
Mm-hmm.
Stacy says, the Cal-Miami game, we literally drove an hour and a half home in complete silence.
Been there.
Mike says, being a Cal fan in general, the Miami game, the Florida State game, then losing the entire running back room to the portal as we, I guess, now look ahead here. Ethan says, the Cal-Miami game, after the GameDay show, the vibes were so good on campus, and at halftime, the fans behind me said, quote, we needed a game like this. And I got to tell you, as a Cal fan, I just grimaced because I knew what could happen, and then it did. Imagine Cal's season if we win that game. Yeah. And then Satya writes in here, he says he's both a Cal and a Virginia Tech fan. Watching both his teams blow leads to Miami at night in consecutive weeks was a special kind of gut punch, Dan.
Yeah, not wrong. And by the way, the sidebar here too is, who was it Michael Irvin on the sideline feeling all of the feelings of the Cal-Miami game? We like to joke that our friend Ari Wasserman, loves with his whole heart, that everything he says, he's fully behind, or at least in that moment. And Michael Irvin felt all of the feelings
he did.
On the sideline in Berkeley, late night game. Like, that game didn't end until after we were done with our stream at like 1 a.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
So the Miami season, with what they did to Michael Irvin and everybody that wanted Miami to win all of their games, with the way they lost to Syracuse, with the way that they lost to Georgia Tech, with the way they beat Virginia Tech, with the way they beat Cal, with the crazy back and forth nature of the Cam Ward playing the first half and eking out eking out a loss to Iowa State in the bowl game, if I have that right. Now Iowa State won that game,
right?
Yeah. Just the swings of Miami football over the course of last season was it's exhausting, I'm sure, for Canes fans.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we didn't get a whole lot of response from the Miami community, but for sure, Miami was...
It's a lot to handle.
Was trauma adjacent last season, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Right? We talk about the Cal game. I mean, that was a bit of an escape. But one of the things that I found interesting in going through the replies that we got was how many were Miami adjacent.
Oh, yeah.
Because Miami was a leading figure in the whole trauma discussion from last season.
Sure.
On a couple different fronts. But John writes in with a scenario that I think is all too common for people, especially for those who live in the Southeast, especially for those who live in big cities where a lot of Big Ten grads or ACC grads or just big college grads tend to congregate.
Sure.
Dallas probably falls into this camp a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
John says, I'm a lifelong Gator fan living in South Florida. 2024 was my first as a season ticket holder, working in an office full of Miami fans. The Miami at Florida game was much anticipated. Then the Canes proceeded to destroy the Gators. I seriously considered quitting my job rather than face the ridicule from Miami fans. God bless Syracuse and the Franimal. Yes. We also had this one here.
Well, also the way they started out the season was terrible against Miami. And then
yeah.
To be able to bathe in that later on in the season, and just another sidebar to the sidebar, just in talking about Miami and Cal this season, because we're trying to like present opportunity for healing for Cal fans. Cal's got the funniest possible schedule this year in the ACC. They have a non-conference game against San Diego State. I believe, let me make sure on this schedule, they have a non-conference game at San Diego State before a conference game at Boston College. San Diego and Boston back to back. What a year. Yeah. So there's an entertainment factor. They have the opportunity to beat Oregon State, former conference foe, on the road in Corvallis to start the season. It looks like, other than SMU, that they're missing Miami, they're missing Clemson. So they only have one trip to the Northeast. So there's that, I guess.
They do go to Virginia Tech.
They go to Virginia Tech, but that's mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, Louisville, it's not quite all the way across the country.
The Northeast thing is killer to me. So I don't know. There's something that maybe there's some magic with Cal. They might be starting a true freshman at quarterback, or Devin Brown, I think, from Ohio State transferred to Cal. So they redid the offensive coaching staff, and Brian Harsin and Nick Rolovich are prominently featured with Cal, and they've had offensive success. I don't know. I think it could be another fun, weird season that hopefully, just in terms of the universe, smiles upon the Cal Bears a little bit more late in games than they did last year.
Back to the Miami thing, though.
Please.
And the comment we got here from John, the Florida fan. Raul writes in with something else that I think is probably fairly commonplace among Verballers out there.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm not writing as a Gator fan, but as an SEC fan. I've worked hard to stop reflexively rooting for SEC teams in out-of-conference games and bowl games.
Okay, that's good.
However, any time an SEC school plays Ohio State,
well,
those who root for SEC schools, including myself, vehemently rally behind any SEC school that plays Ohio State.
I get that.
A few Sugar Bowls aside versus Arkansas and Bama, I've gotten joy out of watching my alma mater and other SEC schools beat the Buckeyes. Even Mizzou got in on the fun in the 2023
a couple years ago. Yeah.
Well, last year in the opening round of the CFP, the Buckeyes beat the Vols so badly and so comprehensively that it's shaken my core as an SEC fan. I am shook. I've seen teams like Pete Carroll, USC, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon throttle SEC teams, but never the Buckeyes.
Right.
This feel of superiority the SEC as a whole has had over the Buckeyes feels like it's over.
I mean, you had Zeke Elliott through the heart of the South, right? That wasn't nothing in the first year of the playoff.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear from fans out there who the team is that you just can't help rooting against. Whether it's got some sort of conference tie-in, whether it's just a personal vendetta against some of these teams.
Right.
I realize that it's healthy for us to let that type of stuff go. But I root against Ohio State, too, just as a fan.
Well,
After
you're always
all these years of watching Penn State lose to Ohio State, after some of the baggage with Notre Dame against Ohio State, yeah. Listen, I'll try to cover it fairly, but I'm a fan at my core. I root against them from time to time. I do. It's
I mean, the teams at the top of the sport are the ones that have the biggest targets. And it's a little bit different now that Nick Saban's not there, because a lot of people love to hate Nick Saban in Alabama, and you want to take them down a peg because they're winning all these national championships, playing for all these national championships. I think Ohio State is there. I think there was a lot of people who didn't like Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, and so for that stretch. People enjoyed Michigan and Jim Harbaugh losing, especially as he's, going throughout the South and taking off his shirt and going to all those satellite camps. I think Texas, obviously, in the Southwest and within the state of Texas, I think there's a ton of joy in seeing Texas go down. Obviously, Oregon has a big target on them because of the attention that they get, the uniforms and Phil Knight and all that stuff. So I understand it. It would be a weird sport if we didn't have arbitrary hate for schools that we weren't at all associated with via a rivalry or family connection. That's just part of how it goes. I think Notre Dame gets to join a conference.
Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame is definitely in that category for a lot of people.
So I get it. I don't know if I have a specific team. It is fun being from LA and knowing 1,000 USC people and hearing like, there's no reason USC can't be competing for national titles every year. And it's been 20 years of mediocrity, basically.
It has been a minute.
And what was it? It was 20 years before Pete Carroll of mediocrity. Like, sometimes you just kind of are what you are, with sometimes getting a blip, sometimes getting blips. So that's entertaining to me, but it's not fun for me to see a USC team down. I like seeing everybody have their time in the sun. So I don't know. It's a good question.
All right, we got to move on here because we got so many.
All right, where are we going next?
Kind of on that same note, we were talking about Notre Dame. We were talking about Ohio State. This is probably the right time to bring up all the Penn State comments that we got.
Oh, sure.
Nate says, the Orange Bowl was going so well, ... Don writes in, got 3 Drew Allar passes. 1 missed slightly on the out pass at the goal line in the semifinals. Secondly, the fourth quarter pick in the semifinals. And third, the Big Ten championship game. Penn State down by 7, coming out of the half, gets the ball to start the second half. They're driving. Future Jets backup, Drew Allar,
yeah, of course,
badly misses an open Tyler Warren on a second down pass. Drive resulted in a missed field goal. Penn State never caught up. And then Andrew, while at the Orange Bowl late in the game, Allar did not see that safety backbreaking interception. That was one of those, as I described earlier, acute moments that just gets you.
Right, because you
gets you.
You force enough stops from a high quality team, put yourself in position to drive down and win a game in poetic fashion. And so you can't help but to play out how these next couple of minutes could play out.
Yes.
And when it's immediately taken, not like taken on the 8-yard line, this is for all the marbles, 4th and goal, something like that, where you're like, well, this is just a huge, tough moment. I can't bear to watch. We'll see if it works out. This is just immediate silencing before any rhythm could be generated. I get it. I've been there. I feel it. Hard to forget it. The good news for Penn State fans, like the way to get over this is a ton of guys are back.
Yeah.
Quarterback is back. Big new defensive coordinator hire. We've talked about Penn State ad nauseum this offseason. There's a lot to love about where Penn State is as a program. They've got the 2 toughies in Ohio State and Oregon this year, but otherwise, I think the non-conference schedule is nothing, right? They're avoiding Pitt still.
Yeah.
Penn State's in a great position. They almost had the ability to play for a national championship with a quarterback who couldn't complete a pass to a receiver, and said quarterback is back. So he's probably going to be better this year. He's older. He's wiser.
I would think so. I think the ceiling is still very high for Penn State.
It's great.
So maybe last season was a teachable opportunity, teachable moment.
Running backs are
Several
back.
of them.
Yeah.
This one killed me from Jeff.
Okay.
Michigan State. Michigan State fan, going to the big house with my then girlfriend to see Michigan State lose a very winnable game by making some really dumb mistakes against the worst Michigan team in years did not feel great. Oh, and my girlfriend left me and is now a PhD student at Michigan. Never had more reasons to hate Ann Arbor. By the way, I like this smoke here at the very end. By the way, the big house was not loud. Very mediocre fan atmosphere for an in-state rivalry game that was actually competitive this year and has been competitive in the modern era.
Look,
thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for that smoke. I love it.
If she went to Michigan, she wasn't going to be for you anyway, it sounds like. Long term, that kind of mindset was not a match. And so I understand feeling that burn, feeling that heat all these months later, almost a year later. But in retrospect, you have the opportunity, or maybe you already had the opportunity, to find somebody more compatible to your Spartan love.
Did you say compatible? It sounded like compatible.
I don't know. I cut my mouth on something last weekend, and I'm not speaking totally correctly. But Michigan State should be a little bit more interesting this year.
Aiden Childs, baby.
Jonathan Smith added a coach or two more familiar with his system offensively. Aiden Childs will probably be a little bit more mature, a little bit more careful, a little bit more comfortable this year, just like you should be a little bit more comfortable seeking out the next love of your life. By the way,
that was wonderful the way you wove that together, Dan.
Taste in a girlfriend going for her PhD means smart gals are into you. So that's good, right?
There you go. Look at the positive side of this.
I'm spinning, Ty. Oh, excuse me. The psychiatrist.
Tychide, thank you.
Yeah. For your consideration on any podcast player, search Solid Verbal, find us, and hit follow or subscribe. It's just that easy.
Do you have any other clips?
Of course I do. I'm going to get personal. You got personal with both Penn State and Notre Dame.
Bad news gets worse. Trevion Henderson is loose down the sidelines, all the way to the end zone. It's a Crimson avalanche here in Pasadena. 66 yards.
Daniel writes in, I watched the Rose Bowl on mute.
Yep.
And in silence while my wife crafted quietly next to me. It was brutal. This is not you, by the way. This is a different Daniel.
As far as you know.
As far as I know.
My wife
Alex also writes in, it's obvious, but for Oregon to go undefeated only to get blown off the field by Ohio State in the Rose Bowl just hurt so bad. I'm an Oregon fan. All I know is hurt.
No.
How did you
feel,
went
13-0 and won the Big Ten. That's not all hurt.
That might be. Listen, we're trying to help you get over the trauma, Alex.
Yeah.
We are trying to help you get over it. So I respect where you're coming from. There wasn't a world of hurt last year. That game sucked. But otherwise, it was pretty good. That was the only loss.
Right.
And you lost to the eventual national champion, who won the title.
Here's the good news. Even if that game didn't start out 31-0, 34-0, whatever the Crimson Avalanche was, Oregon, in the way that they looked, in the way that they seemed to prepare for this game on offense and on defense, and they were beat up, but everybody's beat up come January. It's not an excuse. There was no universe in which they were winning that game. They were losing that game by 30. They were losing that game by 16. They were losing that game by 8 or 3 or 1 or 11. It wasn't to be on that Rose Bowl field. And so, yes, they beat Ohio State and Eugene. Yes, it was a sensational performance, especially by Evan Stewart, who didn't play in that game, who now I think has a mystery injury and is either out for the season or out for some time, allegedly.
Is the rumor. Yeah.
So Oregon's in good shape moving forward. A new quarterback who seems to be going to be Dante Moore, who has a huge amount of upside, perhaps more so than Dylan Gabriel, who was himself excellent for Oregon last year. There's a ton to love about Oregon moving forward. The talent level, the recruiting. Schedule's pretty good this year. They don't have Ohio State in the regular season. They travel to Penn State, but it's a good schedule and a good team, if not a great team once again. And it was over so quickly. We're just like, nope, they weren't ready in the correct way for this. And yes, it's embarrassing. And yes, it can be thrown in your face by people who hate Oregon or Ohio State fans or whatever. But there's a certain amount of peace you can have. It was like, wasn't happening that day. No matter what, it was not happening that day. And so Ohio State going on to win the national championship in the fashion that they did. Okay. Oregon lost the best team. Lost more emphatically than others, but they lost to the best team. And so there's something there. And it's hard to feel bad for Oregon fans given the state of Duck football in 2025. So you're all right. You'll be all right. It was a tough afternoon, and it probably won't happen like that again. But it has happened twice. The Oregon-Ohio State game and the Oregon-Georgia game to kick off Dan Lanning's career.
By the way, since when are we calling Ohio State's surge the Crimson Avalanche? Aren't they the Scarlet and Gray?
They are. I'm not sure where that came from Chris Fowler, but I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe he was referring to the blood of Oregon running down the mountain. I don't know.
Speaking of Crimson, Dan.
Yeah.
Oklahoma fan here.
Mm.
See what I did there? That's a pro.
Yeah. Crimson
Casey
and cream.
says, I feel like I can never trust an offense again. How do I heal from watching our punter be our most effective quarterback?
Yes.
Mason says, after so many years of defensive ineptitude and offensive achievement, my Sooners show up for their first SEC campaign with an elite defensive unit and their worst offense of this century.
Yeah.
A full team effort in creating a toothless offense, including a terrible offensive coordinator hire, a thoroughly disappointing quarterback, a comical amount of injuries clustered on the line and wide receiver positions. The worst singular moment would be the Mizzou loss, with just a comedy of errors from everyone involved that seemed at the time like it would cost Oklahoma its 26-year bowl streak. Thank you, Mason.
Scooped up by the Tigers. Zion Young with the scoop and score. Madness in Columbia.
When you hear the fireworks go off, that was really insult to injury, wasn't
Yes, of course. Always. I think that was also at the end of the Oklahoma State-Arkansas double overtime game. There were some fireworks or cannons or something in the background there.
I get the trauma on the Oklahoma side. Oklahoma had a little bit of all the traumas that I described earlier.
Yeah.
Some of those very specific ones that happen in a moment. Some of the more drawn out slow motion types that have you questioning, where's the bottom? Will there be a bottom?
Yeah.
You saw a little bit all of it if you were an Oklahoma fan last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of it, as Mason points out, to do it in your first year going into the SEC was definitely the kind of thing that sticks with you. That being said, if we're out here trying to heal, you should feel good knowing that Brent Venables did not just rest on his laurels this offseason. Okay, they went out, they got John Mateer. They went out, they got Ben Arbuckle, John Mateer's offensive coordinator. Jay Knott, most recently in the spring portal. They bring him over from Cal. This is definitely a coaching staff, i.e. a head coach, who knows what needs to be knows what needs to be fixed in 2025. So they're at least trying. Now, whether or not it materializes, we'll get back to you. But their heart is in the right place. And I think I would take solace if I were a Sooners fan, knowing that they're at least going out after the thing that we think needs to get better.
I hear you. It's got to be so strange for Oklahoma fans having the run that they did on offense and at quarterback specifically, watching an Oklahoma quarterback win the Super Bowl, Oklahoma/Alabama and Jalen Hurts, right? You know, seeing the guys and Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield and the receivers and the running backs and your Hollywood Browns and your Rodney Andersons, whatever, Joe Mixon. And then as the page turns, you're just like, we're a defensive team now. You're just like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that.
It's like when Richie starts wearing suits in The Bear. Like, I'm a suit guy now.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rebranding.
When did this happen?
Right. When Lolo Jones is, running a bobsled down the ice. You're just like, okay. That's who
when
did
Shaq
that, right?
tried to rap. All these things that happen.
I
and
would
just
say
leave you
Shaq
scratching
was
your head.
Shaq, for being an athlete, a non-full-time rapper, was fine. I think
I never got used to that, but fine.
But that was
Continue.
just like a side hustle. That wasn't like, this is who I am now. That was a side hustle. But yeah, there
he
are
was
those...
in Shazam. Shazam was the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. Full stop. When Shaq made that turn into entertainment,
yeah,
at least as a recording artist, as an actor, I love him on Inside the NBA. He's great on that. But that whole era of Shaq was not really for me.
Right. No, we've seen dramatic actors try comedy out and vice versa, and it does not always work. So Oklahoma's just looking for their dramedy balance, right? They're just looking to figure out who they can be moving forward. And there's a lot to like about the moves they made. I would love for them to have a little bit more pop at receiver, a little more depth and meat along the offensive line. But it seems that slowly but surely the neutral is going into drive for Oklahoma's offense.
You got any other clips for us?
I do have another clip. I believe this is the one right here.
To stay alive, can they hook 'em? Touchdown, Matthew Golden!
4th and 13 for ASU.
Man, I felt that one. I felt that one again.
Yeah.
On the replay here. Yes. The trauma is yours if you are an ASU fan. We got a couple comments about this one from Mark, from Bobby. It was sort of two things that went hand in hand. Right?
It wasn't from Kenny, though. It wasn't
It wasn't
Kenny
from
Dillingham.
Kenny,
Okay,
no.
just making sure.
Kenny is still blacked out from that one.
Yeah.
But two things that went down. The first was the 4th and 13 conversion. Okay, just Texas being able to convert.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, it happening after that very bizarre no call on what I thought was an obvious targeting foul.
Right.
So Mark writes in, says, as an ASU fan, it can only be the 4th and 13 in overtime in the Peach Bowl. Had not allowed myself to hope for more all year long, but it really felt like we were about to shock the world until we decided to dial up that zero blitz, alas.
Yeah.
Crying emoji. And then Bobby says the targeting non-call in the Peach Bowl, followed by, yes, the conversion on the 4th and 13. So,
this is the heartbreak that comes with letting yourself be vulnerable and be hurt, right? That it's 4th and 13 in your mind is like, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
We've arrived. We've landed. Everything is going great. And it's just this one play. And Quinn Ewers has been up and down. This offense has been up and down, started quickly, sort of slid to a halt. And, while there's obviously great players on this offense, ASU's defense has done a really nice job figuring things out, leaning on Cam Scadaboo on offense. And 4th and 13 yards is so many yards. Like, ASU is right there. I'm ready to be loved. I'm ready to be hurt. And hurt ASU. Quinn Ewers did.
This was, I mentioned earlier, specific moments that I remember. I remember this moment.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
I remember where I was. I remember how it made me feel. I think if you weren't a Texas fan, if you weren't an SEC fan rooting for Texas.
Right.
Or just somebody in the state of Texas who was rooting for Texas.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the people were rooting for ASU in that moment because as you looked at the college football playoff bracket, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of room for upsets. And we know upsets are kind of the lifeblood of this thing. And so we were pulling, I will say we, because I probably was in this boat in the moment, pulling for Arizona State to keep it interesting, to make it interesting.
Yeah.
And they did. I mean, they had this game. They played their hearts out between Cam Scadaboo and Sam Levitt and, all of the madness that transpired in this Peach Bowl.
And it would mean ASU winning would mean them sort of kicking open the door and getting into a club that has almost regularly or routinely featured like 9 teams.
That's
in
right.
Like the semifinals, quarterfinal, the best 4, 6, 8 teams. Yeah.
It was a terrible no call.
I agree.
It was a terrible no call. As Mark says, the zero blitz did not work. So, yes, it was a rather disappointing sequence that served as the cherry on top of an incredible finish to that game, if you're an Arizona State fan.
Yes.
If you're an ASU fan, look, I mean, Kenny Dillingham, I think he told Pete Nakos he thinks that they're like the next big program.
Why not?
He thinks they're the next big thing. And you know what? The Big 12 is still pretty damn wide open, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
He could be right about that. He's got a really exciting quarterback in Sam Levitt coming back. Sam Levitt, by the way, gets his wide receiver 1 back
Jordan Tyson,
from injury.
Yeah.
Jordan Tyson, by some accounts, is the best receiver in the upcoming draft class.
Wow. Didn't know that. Okay.
Right? So there's a lot, I think, to be excited about. And Kenny Dillingham is a lifer. He's not going anywhere. I'm sure if he wanted to, he could, but he's not.
Right.
So it's high times for ASU. He has turned this thing around a lot quicker than anybody thought possible. Do not be so focused on the overtime sequencing in that playoff game and instead look at the bigger picture, which I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah. No, it definitely felt like ASU was there. And, to not have Cam Scadaboo back and to lose a couple key players, that this was definitely an ASU team that could compete with the country's best. If you're competing with Texas, the way how close Texas was, and ASU was competing. Yeah. 4th and 13.
Especially down the stretch, because, as we were talking through what was transpiring throughout the course of the season.
Yeah.
It was a lot of like, hey, ASU could actually sneak into this thing, right?
Sure.
We had weird tiebreakers because they all got rid of their divisions and whatnot. But we watched extra closely on that Big 12. And ASU finding its way into the game and then acquitting itself as well as it did, I think. In and of itself, like that.
Well, they were also
seen
seen as like a participation trophy team because they got the seeding bump
right
after not being ranked in the top 4, but they got the seeding bump to being a top 4 seed given last year's rules.
It was a huge win. Huge win for that program. Speaking of Texas.
Okay, what do you have?
You know what I'm going to say with Texas.
I think there's the ending of the Ohio State game.
Ray writes in and says, Longhorn fan. Watching them methodically march down the field to tie the game before half, only for Ohio State to run a screen pass for 75 yards.
Yeah.
Then to once again march down to the red zone at the end of the game, run a horrible toss play to lose yards, only to sit and watch in horror as Jack Sawyer comes around the corner to blindside Ewers.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a moment.
Mm-hmm.
That was a moment in time, Texas fans. I don't know what the future in 2025 has in store. I don't know how long Arch Manning will be on campus. It seems as if Steve Sarkisian has cranked this thing up to a point where they've hit something of critical mass. The floor has been raised effectively on that Texas program, thanks to Sark. But that moment is going to stick with you, especially if they get back to the playoff this year.
Yeah.
Especially because even if Texas is loaded, and I think they're loaded, those are the types of moments that are caught in the deep, dark corners of your mind. And even if you feel like things are trending in a positive direction, you've got all the momentum, you still think back to, I hope that doesn't happen again. I hope something like this does not happen again in a high leverage moment. So I'm with you, Ray. If you're trying to heal from it, all I could say is Texas is going to be loaded again, and you've got Arch Manning, who might be a better quarterback, and there's a lot to like about Texas, obviously. But
there's also the Texas,
moments like this are really tough to come back from, just as a fan.
The Texas stretches last year, though, as good of a season as it was. So there's the moments like Jack Sawyer and running the ball back and the screen right before halftime, which Texas just looked super lost on defensively. Texas's offensive line was overwhelmed against Georgia in that first game, that they just looked like they were on skates. They didn't know where Georgia players were coming from. Losing the SEC championship game, so good of Texas to get to that game, losing to Gunnar Stockton in Georgia late.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a moment that's hard to get over. And then, of course, the way that they lost Ohio State. So it's tough if you're a Texas fan, from afar, I think. I am from afar, to say what a year 2024 was, when there was that very, very specific pain that I'm still I'm positive it's still lingering.
Oh, yeah. All right. Let me go rapid fire through a few of these other ones.
I'm ready.
We got a bunch of Texas A&M people writing in, specifically about the Texas game.
Okay, so that was a nice moment for Texas, yeah.
Evan says he waited 13 years for A&M to play Texas, just hoping and dreaming for a chance to redeem ourselves after the last-second loss in 2011. The Aggies rewarded that with being shut out offensively at home, another Thanksgiving weekend devastated just like old times. Okay. Thank you, Evan.
Yeah, I get that.
Daryl writes in, says he's an A&M grad season ticket holder, wasn't happy about the Longhorns joining the SEC, wasn't looking forward to our game with them. I told my brother before the game that it wouldn't be fun, but rather just 4 hours of anxiety. That's exactly what it was. It was not fun at all.
Yes.
And then Kyle writes in more broadly, just injuries to A&M's offensive line early in the Notre Dame game. Also, Le'Veon Moss going down against South Carolina and the momentum completely shifting against us. A&M had some moments last year. If you're an A&M fan, how do you feel about year one under Mike Elko?
I feel okay. So it's hard for me to put myself in that position because for me, from afar, A&M late was in it to get to the SEC championship game.
They were. They very much were.
With a defense that had some terrific moments, but also some regrettable second halves, with, starting running back going down almost immediately to start the season, and it being a first-year head coach, you hope to see a vision, you hope to see proof of concept, and they just kind of kept on chugging. Like, there was no shame in losing to Notre Dame, other than the fact that was like a semi-winnable game at home to start the year, but it's game one. So, like, you're encouraged. Recruiting has been good. So I think if you're able to separate reality from your very real pain, the outlook is bright. But if you look at the specific kind of pain involved in not scoring an offensive touchdown against Texas after all that time off, the only thing that can fix that is beating Texas and scoring 30-plus points. The only thing that can truly fill that wound, fill that hole in your heart, is doing the exact opposite this year, I think.
Let's talk a little Texas State trauma, shall we?
Okay.
Heather writes in, Texas State losing to Sam Houston 40-39. I remember that game.
Of course.
I was big on Texas State last year.
Mm-hmm.
It was the restart of the biggest rivalry us Bobcats had in the FCS Southland days. But more importantly, and this is where it gets funny, Dan, my high school ex went there. So when I logged into Facebook, him trash talking was the very first thing I saw. Especially brutal since I spent all offseason talking about how the Bearcats went 3-9 the year before.
Ty, do you follow or are friends with any of your former Flames on social media?
It's funny you should ask that. I did just check as we were going through this, and it appears that the answer is yes.
On which platform?
Facebook.
Is that, do you accidentally come across a post from whoever this young lady is?
I believe I hid this person many moons ago, so I no longer get any of those updates, which is what I would advise Heather to do if it's still sort of the thing that causes trauma. Especially during college football season,
I would say, if you have any sort of, even a tiny microscopic amount of bad blood with anyone, when a relationship, an important relationship, maybe an ex from high school isn't that important, but if there was any actual real world love trauma, Ty,
no,
you got to unfriend, you got to unfollow, you got to block. No. There's no good reason to have that lingering as a possibility in your life. That like, oh, here's a post from a wedding. Here are her kids. Here, like, no. Got to move forward. It's the Bill Belichick. If there's anything he said, there's two things he said.
Yes, let's take Bill Belichick's advice on love and relationships, shall we?
The first thing that you got to admit, what do you say, on to Cincinnati?
Yeah.
You're just on to the next day, right? You got to be on to the next day. The other thing I think that's very wise of him to say was, how old are you? That was probably really smart of him to ask at some point. Yeah. That's you got to unfriend, you got to block, you got to mute, you got to unfollow, whatever you got to do. There's no reason. If anybody caused you pain, you can't have it online. Just can't.
Derek writes in, he says, as a BYU fan, I need to get the loss to Kansas off my chest. A quarterback punt bouncing off a DB's helmet is one of the wildest ways to lose a game, and I'm not sure if I've fully recovered. He's not wrong about this one, Dan. That was a hell of a way to lose a game.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wouldn't wish it on my. I would wish it on my worst enemy, but not like my third worst enemy.
Brandon says the end of the opener between Minnesota and North Carolina.
Yeah.
A big run into a chip shot field goal, which was called back for holding, followed by the reigning Big Ten kicker of the year missing a 47-yarder to win it. Dropping the opener on national television, carrying an 86% post-game win expectancy, shifted the vibes on the entire season. In the end, it was the difference between 7 and 8 wins, which is right on the dividing line between a shrug emoji and a good season. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota had an interesting enough year. There's a lot of new faces at Minnesota this year, and they just kind of keep winning. But they were within a point of eventual Big Ten runners-up and playoff semifinalists, Penn State, 26-25. There's a lot to like. Minnesota bounced back and had a quality season. But yeah, that North Carolina game, absolutely winnable.
We've got one here from Andrew.
Okay.
Rutgers getting the best possible schedule from the Big Ten, avoiding all 4 teams that made the playoff, and still barely making a bowl. Can Rutgers ever break through? Good question.
The answer is likely no. But if Andrew lives in the Garden State, you likely have access to what I would consider maybe the best pizza state in the Union.
There you go.
Full pizza state, not necessarily pizza styles. Pizza
Sad
City.
pizza. Sad pizza goes a long way. Ask Urban Meyer.
Sad pizza is pizza.
Law writes in about Tulane. Being ranked at 9-2 with a real shot at the playoff thanks to the weird playoff setup, only to lose to Memphis and the AAC title game to Army was just brutal. Even more so when it was revealed after the Army game that Darian Mensah had already packed his bags and left the team and really had mentally checked out before that huge Memphis game.
Right. Not going to lie, that seemed very painful, but the future, again, I think Tulane has what we consider to be a pretty great coach. Don't know how long he's going to be in town, but the short-term future still seems decently bright if you're a Tulane fan. The Mensah thing is not fun. The end of that season, 9-2, they got like shelled by Army, right? In the title game. Yeah, not a great way to end the year, but I think there's still a lot of quality in New Orleans.
Let me rip through a few of these here real quick,
Okay.
and we'll wind this thing down. Sean writes in, LSU fans still reeling from the 3-game skid when the team came off the rails. We've got a couple here from Washington fans. Robert in particular says, as a Washington fan, losing the Apple Cup was pretty rough. Not for the loss from a Washington perspective, but more for the hope and playoff joy it gave Washington State. I love this.
I get that.
I love this
I get
smoke. This is great smoke from Robert.
Yeah.
The hope and playoff joy it gave Washington State before their month-long downfall at the end of the season.
Yeah, losing their offensive coordinator, losing their quarterback to punctuate it all. Yeah.
Good stuff there. Justin wrote in, just broadly speaking, about Ohio State losing for the 4th year in a row to Michigan. By the way, a Michigan team that looked like their quarterback learned that the forward pass existed only moments before game time.
Yep.
It was absolutely infuriating. Yeah, we didn't even talk enough about that. We talked a lot about Ohio State and some of the bigger market schools here. But yeah, losing that game, I get that there is trauma with that.
Of course.
College Sports Tonight weighing in on Oklahoma State, who we referenced a couple times in passing. Being told your team is a great chance at winning a conference championship and ultimately not being anywhere close.
Yeah.
Season-long disappointment. Yes, that is trauma.
But over quickly.
Over quickly.
You knew.
Ryan says, I was at work during the Baylor, Colorado game. Work was slow, so I was following it along. Even before, I still had some optimism for the season and wasn't fully on the Aranda fire train. When Baylor gave up the game-tying touchdown, I went fully on that train.
Yeah.
My friends were watching the game on Discord, messaging me to see how I was doing.
Ooh.
That's always the worst when they're
Health
asking,
check,
hey, how you doing? They lost. The second I got into my car to go home, I jumped on the Discord call to give my biggest and loudest rant ever. I'm happy how the season ended, but man, I was down at the beginning.
I get
feel
that.
you, Ryan. Totally get that.
And you're not even watching the game. You're at work. So you're just like, bad things are happening. I don't know the details. Bad stuff is going on in Boulder.
Melty, who wrote in earlier about Notre Dame, also writes in as a Louisville fan. He says, as a Louisville fan, coming off a historical win at Clemson with a bye week to prepare, looking at a 9-3 regular season with the losses to 2 playoff teams and a first-round pick quarterback, and then they lose to Stanford?
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Stanford? That was one of the more inexplicable losses of the year.
Louisville was, very clearly a team just good enough to pull off a huge upset, but just not fully baked enough to also lose in embarrassing fashion to someone who happened to be across the country in Palo Alto in a quiet stadium in Stanford.
And let's close things out with Dan.
Okay. Not me.
you. On my birthday, I was flying out to Boston to see Pearl Jam at Fenway.
Okay. Great.
And on the plane, I got to watch Notre Dame score touchdown after touchdown against superstar Dylan Thieneman and the Purdue defense to the tune of 66 points
Yeah.
in the first FBS game
I love
for the
the
Boilers.
subtle bitterness. Yeah, continue.
The season was a waste after that. Although I did go to the Final Four, Purdue fan after all.
Yeah.
And Pearl Jam was awesome.
Okay.
So it sounds like maybe he's already healed from that trauma. But that was
And-
not a fun game.
Neil Armstrong is still a Purdue alum. Guy's a
you
national hero.
As is your brother.
Same sentence. In terms of aviation, Neil Armstrong and my middle brother just step for step with each other. Yeah.
You're in good company.
Yes.
You're in good. I worked with a guy when I was at the old day job who was a Purdue grad. He was an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the tallest human I've ever met in my life.
So surprisingly tall, like we talked about on our bonus show last week.
Surprisingly tall.
Yeah.
Huge. Nice guy. That's all.
He was surprisingly tall. And by the way, just to tie a bow on everything, because it was the Verballers who submitted all of these dramatic points, you can listen to a deep dive on aviation with my brother, the pilot, that we recorded a year or two ago on Verballers.com. He answered
you do need to pay for
aviation
that
questions.
content. You do need to pay for that content, but yes.
Yeah, that is behind the paywall. If you want the scoop on aviation and airlines in the 2020s.
Maybe we should bring him back, actually.
It might
Been
be
a lot
time.
going on.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you, everybody, for being vulnerable with us and sending in these moments. Hopefully, just calling them out again, talking them through again, reliving them in somewhat painstaking detail is enough for you to get over it and get ready for the season ahead. As I said, we are going to start our previews when things turn over into July. The very first episode we are going to do is going to be almost identical to the one we did a year ago. The intro to the 2025 college football season. What changed in the offseason?
What's new?
What are the big storylines, the big transfers? What are the high-level things that you need to know as a college football fan to get ready for this season? It's a good starting point because what we did for a decade was just dive right in with conference previews. But we need to set the table.
Agree.
You know, I'm big on that. The context. You need to set the context, wet the whistle, get things started. We will do our intro to the 25 season, and then we will dive into Group of 6.
Can't wait.
Okay? That work for you?
Done.
Verballers.com is where you can go to further support what Dan and I do. Thank you again, everybody who posted a comment in reply. Just because we recorded the episode doesn't mean you can't still go out to that post and leave for us in the comment thread those moments that provided you with the most trauma last season, the things that hurt you. Use that comment thread as a sounding board. The Verballerhood is a great community of people that can help you along. Hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes. I feel like 1,000-pound gorilla is now off my shoulders, Dan.
Weight off your chest. Yeah.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrand, thank you for downloading, for listening, for sharing your thoughts with us. We'll talk to you all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.